What if I told you that the first person to live to 1,000 years old might already be alive today? What if aging isn't actually inevitable, just a problem we haven't solved yet? Today we're diving into Why We Die, the New Science of Aging and the Quest for Immortality by Venki Ramakrishnan, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who takes us on a fascinating journey from ancient Egyptian mummies to Silicon Valley billionaires, all united by humanity's oldest obsession, cheating death. This isn't just another book about getting older. Ramakrishnan reveals the cutting-edge science behind why our bodies break down, the revolutionary discoveries happening in labs right now, and the mind-bending question of whether we should even want to live forever. Let's dive into the fascinating science of why we die and whether we have to. Picture this. You're standing in the British Museum, surrounded by ancient Egyptian mummies. These aren't just artifacts. They're people who lived, loved, and desperately wanted to cheat death. 3,000 years later, we're still trying to solve the same puzzle. But now, instead of wrapping ourselves in linen and hoping for the best, we have something far more powerful: molecular biology. We're the only species that knows we're going to die. A mouse doesn't wake up thinking about its mortality. A tree doesn't ponder its eventual decay. But we do, and this knowledge has haunted us since we first developed consciousness, driving us to build pyramids, write symphonies, and search endlessly for the fountain of youth. But here's the fascinating paradox. While we as individuals die, life itself is immortal. Every creature alive today, including you, is part of an unbroken chain stretching back billions of years. Your cells carry the descendants of ancient bacteria that have been passing their genetic torch from generation to generation, never once letting the flame go out. So why do our individual bodies give up the ghost? The answer lies in one of biology's most elegant and ruthless calculations. In the 1970s, a British scientist named Thomas Kirkwood came up with a theory that sounds almost cruel but explains everything. Imagine you're running a business with limited resources. You can either invest everything in maintaining your current equipment forever, or you can use those resources to create new improved versions. Evolution made this choice long ago, and it chose to make our bodies disposable. Here's how it works. Your genes are immortal, passed down through sperm and egg cells that get special protection and maintenance. But your body? That's just the vessel, designed to get those genes safely to the next generation. Once you've reproduced and raised your children to independence, evolution doesn't particularly care what happens to you. This isn't cruel, it's efficient. Resources that would go into keeping a 90-year-old body perfectly maintained are better spent ensuring that 20-year-old bodies can reproduce successfully. The result? We're magnificently optimized for youth and reproduction, but we break down predictably as we age. Think of your life as a candle. You can burn bright and fast or dim and slow, but you can't do both. Small animals with rapid metabolisms live intensely but briefly, like mayflies that dance for a single day. Large animals with slower metabolisms live like ancient tortoises, plodding through centuries. But there's more to this story. Geoffrey West, a physicist at the Santa Fe Institute who studies complex systems, discovered something remarkable. Most mammals get roughly the same number of heartbeats in their lifetime, about 1.5 billion. It's as if evolution designed life with a built-in odometer. Except humans have somehow managed to double their allotment. A century ago, we lived about as long as our evolutionary cousins. Today, we've extended our lives far beyond what our ancestors could have imagined. But we've reached this point by cheating, using medicine, sanitation, and technology to outrun our biological programming. The question now is, how much further can we push it? Act 2, the molecular breakdown. Meet Thomas Lindahl, a Swedish scientist who made a discovery that should have terrified him. In the 1970s, working with RNA molecules in his Princeton lab, he noticed they kept breaking down. This led him to ask a crucial question. If DNA is supposedly stable enough to store life's instructions, exactly how stable is it? The answer was shocking. At the heart of every cell lies DNA, life's instruction manual. But imagine if the only copy of your most important document slowly degraded over time, with pages becoming illegible and instructions getting scrambled. That's exactly what happens to our DNA as we age. Lindell discovered that every day, your DNA suffers about 100,000 separate attacks from the normal chemistry of being alive. Water molecules crash into it. Free radicals, the cellular equivalent of rust, corrode it. The copying machinery makes mistakes. It's like having a beautiful handwritten manuscript that gets rained on, photocopied badly, and handled by countless people until the original message becomes impossible to read. Your cells fight back heroically. They have repair crews working around the clock, teams of molecular machines with names like excision repair and mismatch repair, fixing damage almost as fast as it occurs. But it's a losing battle. The repair systems themselves age and make mistakes. Gradually, inevitably, the information that keeps you alive degrades. Now let me tell you about Elizabeth Blackburn, a scientist who grew up with 7 siblings and a menagerie of pets in Tasmania, Australia. She had no idea that her curiosity about chromosome tips would unlock one of aging's greatest secrets. Here's one of biology's most elegant solutions to an impossible problem. At the tips of your chromosomes are protective caps called telomeres. Think of them as the plastic tips on shoelaces that prevent fraying. Every time a cell divides, these telomeres get a little shorter, like a fuse burning down. When they get too short, the cell receives a signal. Stop. You're old. Time to retire. This prevents aged, potentially dangerous cells from reproducing. It's a brilliant anti-cancer mechanism, but it comes with a price. Your tissues gradually lose their ability to regenerate. Blackburn, working with her graduate student Carol Greiter, discovered the enzyme that maintains these protective caps, telomerase. But here's the catch. Most of your cells don't make enough of it. Cancer cells do, which is partly why they can multiply indefinitely. It's a cruel irony. The mechanism that protects you from cancer also ages you. Blackburn also found that stress actually accelerates telomere shortening. So when people say stress ages you, they're literally correct at the cellular level. Every moment of chronic worry, every sleepless night, every period of intense pressure actually shortens the protective caps on your chromosomes. Your cells are like incredibly sophisticated factories, producing thousands of different proteins that carry out the work of life. But like any factory, they produce waste. Proteins misfold, get damaged, or simply become obsolete. When you're young, your cellular janitors, systems called proteasomes and autophagy, efficiently clean up this molecular garbage. Think of proteasomes as tiny wood chippers that grab defective proteins and shred them into recyclable parts. Autophagy works like a garbage truck, engulfing larger pieces of cellular junk and delivering them to recycling centers called lysosomes. But as you age, these cleanup systems slow down. Misfolded proteins start accumulating like a hoarder's house. In your brain, these protein clumps become the tangles and plaques of Alzheimer's disease. It's a haunting example of how the very molecules meant to keep you alive can become your enemies. Act 3. The Cellular Revolution. 2 billion years ago, one of the most important events in the history of life occurred, and it involved eating your roommate. A larger cell engulfed a smaller bacterium, but instead of digesting it, they formed a partnership that changed everything. Today, the descendants of that ancient bacterium live inside every one of your cells as mitochondria, your cellular power plants. They're the reason you have the energy to think, move, and live. But they're also aging, and as they fail, you fail with them. These ancient stowaways within us are both our greatest allies and a major source of our aging. It's like having a car where the engine gradually wears out, but you can't replace it. As your mitochondria age, they produce less energy and more toxic waste products. Your grandson's boundless energy comes from his young, efficient mitochondria. Your fatigue comes from yours slowly breaking down. Let me tell you about one of the most unlikely scientific discoveries in history, one that began with Canadian scientists collecting soil samples from Easter Island in 1964, not looking for anti-aging drugs but trying to understand why the islanders didn't get tetanus. Fast forward to a freezer in Montreal, where a scientist named Suren Segal stored vials of bacteria next to ice cream labeled "Don't Eat." When his company shut down the project, Segal smuggled these frozen bacteria to his new job, convinced they held something important. The bacteria produced a compound called rapamycin, which turned out to inhibit a master pathway that controls cellular growth and aging. But the real breakthrough came in Basel, Switzerland, where an international trio of scientists decided to do something that seemed crazy: study an immunosuppressive drug using baker's yeast. They discovered TOR, target of rapamycin, one of life's most important controllers. When nutrients are abundant, TOR tells cells to grow and multiply. When food is scarce, it tells them to hunker down, clean house, and survive. This pathway explains why caloric restriction extends life in nearly every species tested, from yeast to mice to monkeys. Suddenly, the ancient wisdom about fasting and moderation had a molecular explanation, and scientists began to wonder, could they make a pill that mimics the life-extending effects of eating less? Meanwhile, at the University of California, Irvine, a graduate student named David Friedman, was working with his professor Tom Johnson on something even more revolutionary. They were studying a tiny soil worm called C. elegans, a creature so small you need a microscope to see it, with only 900 cells in its entire body. Johnson had isolated mutant worms that lived twice as long as normal. This should have been impossible according to the prevailing wisdom that aging was controlled by hundreds of genes, each contributing a small effect. But here was a single gene that doubled lifespan. Gary Ruvkun, working nearby, figured out what these genes actually did. They controlled an ancient hormone pathway, the same insulin-like signaling system that exists in virtually every animal, including humans. Suddenly, aging research wasn't just about mysterious degenerative processes. It was about specific, targetable molecular pathways. Act 4. The Quest for Immortality. Today's anti-aging industry represents humanity's most ambitious attempt yet to cheat death. Silicon Valley billionaires, spooked by their own mortality, have poured billions into companies promising to crack the aging code. They approach death like a software bug to be patched, a problem to be engineered away. Some of their targets are genuinely promising: drugs that clear senescent zombie cells, age cells that stop dividing but won't die, instead pumping out inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissue. Techniques to reprogram aged cells back to a youthful state using factors discovered by Shinya Yamanaka, who showed that just 4 proteins could turn any adult cell back into an embryonic-like state. But the field is also littered with hype and false promises. David Sinclair, a Harvard professor, still promotes resveratrol despite overwhelming evidence that it doesn't work as advertised. His company, Sertrus, was sold to GlaxoSmithKline for $720 million, only to be shut down when the drugs failed to deliver. Supplement companies sell anti-aging pills based on the flimsiest evidence, exploiting our fear of aging with products that range from useless to potentially harmful. The desperation to avoid death makes people vulnerable to modern snake oil. Perhaps nothing captures our obsession with youth like the recent revival of parabiosis experiments, connecting the bloodstreams of old and young animals. When researchers at Stanford did this with mice, something remarkable happened. The old mice became healthier while the young mice showed signs of aging. Young blood contains growth factors and repair signals. Old blood carries inflammatory proteins and cellular debris. The experiments revealed aging as something that flows through our veins and potentially something we might manipulate. Tech mogul Brian Johnson took this literally, spending $2 million annually on an anti-aging regimen that included receiving blood transfusions from his teenage son in a modern vampire ritual. He documented everything obsessively, including over 33,000 images of his bowels. When the transfusions showed no benefit, he stopped, but not before generating headlines that captured the public's fascination with the promise of young blood. The FDA has repeatedly warned against unregulated blood transfusion therapies, noting they're unproven and potentially dangerous. Companies like Ambrosia charged $8,000 per liter for young plasma with no evidence of benefit and significant risk of harm. Act 5. If scientists succeed in dramatically extending human lifespan, imagine a world where people routinely live to 120, 150, or even 200 years old. The current projections suggest we'll see compression of morbidity, staying healthy longer before a relatively quick decline within the next 20 to 30 years. Economics built around retirement at 65 would collapse. Political power would concentrate even more in the hands of the elderly. Resources would be stretched thin. The gap between rich and poor, already significant in lifespan, could become a chasm between the near-immortal wealthy and the normally mortal masses. In the United States, the richest already live 15 years longer than the poorest, and this gap is widening. Here's an uncomfortable truth that challenges our assumptions about the value of longer life. Human creativity peaks young. The greatest scientific discoveries, works of art, and innovations typically come from people in their 20s and 30s, not their 70s and 80s. If we dramatically extend lifespans without addressing mental decline, we might create a gerontocracy, a society ruled by the old, where fresh ideas are suppressed and innovation stagnates. The very minds that could solve tomorrow's problems might be trapped in bodies that no longer think with youthful boldness. Conclusion: the eternal question. As I researched this story, I kept returning to a fundamental question. Even if we could live forever, should we? Our mortality gives life urgency and meaning. It makes each day precious because we know they're numbered. Without death, would we still be human in any meaningful sense? The Pew Research Center explored American attitudes on living much longer. While people were optimistic about medical advances, over half said slowing aging would be bad for society. Most doubted these treatments would be available to everyone, and 2/3 felt they would strain natural resources. The revolution in aging research will continue, driven by brilliant scientists and unlimited money. Based on current research trajectories, we will almost certainly see dramatic advances in treating age-related diseases and extending healthy lifespan within the next 10 to 20 years. Senolytic drugs to clear zombie cells are already in human trials. Stem cell therapies are showing promise. Blood factors are being isolated and tested. But the dream of defeating death entirely remains just that, a dream. Even the most optimistic researchers like David Sinclair acknowledge we're decades away from truly dramatic life extension and centuries away from anything approaching immortality. In the meantime, the best anti-aging medicine remains what it has always been. Eat well but not too much, exercise regularly, get enough sleep, manage stress, and maintain strong social connections. These simple practices, validated by millions of years of evolution and decades of modern research, remain more powerful than any pill currently on the market. Exercise literally creates new mitochondria. Good sleep clears protein garbage from your brain. Stress management preserves telomeres. Social connections reduce inflammation. These aren't sexy biotechnology solutions, but they work. Perhaps the most profound insight from studying aging is this: life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be experienced. We are temporary arrangements of ancient atoms, briefly conscious and incredibly lucky to exist at all. Our job is not to live forever, but to live fully while we can. We die because that's the deal evolution made. We live because 4 billion years of ancestors survived long enough to pass their genes to us. We search for immortality because we're the only species that knows time is precious. That knowledge, terrible and wonderful, is both our curse and our greatest gift. The story of aging research is ultimately a story about hope. Hope that we can ease suffering, extend health, and give people more time with those they love. Whether we achieve modest gains or revolutionary breakthroughs, that hope drives some of humanity's finest minds to ask the biggest questions. So, let's have a look at the key takeaways of this book. Aging isn't a natural law, but an evolutionary trade-off. Our bodies are designed to be disposable vessels for immortal genes. Evolution invested in getting us to reproductive age, not maintaining us forever. While we can't escape this fundamental programming, we're learning to manipulate the molecular machinery of aging through pathways like TOR, DNA repair systems, and cellular cleanup mechanisms. The quest for dramatically extended lifespans faces profound challenges. Creativity peaks young, societies aren't built for 150-year lifespans, and true longevity treatments remain decades away. Most importantly, the simple lifestyle interventions we already know, exercise, good sleep, stress management, and social connections, remain more.